Well, we're here today and it's raining. It's not a very nice day, but we have with us Paul Hesse, who's an accomplished sailor. He has crossed the Atlantic in a Viking ship and other boats and ships, have been in Greenland and all kinds of other things. But one of the things we often talk about, Paul, is that how did we get into sailing, and what is your inspiration for getting into sailing?
Yeah, I feel like I was drawn to it. My mother's family were seamen in Norway, and one time my father came home with a Grumman canoe with a sail rig, and he gave me a bunch of cloth and told me if I wanted to sail, I needed to sew a sail together to make it into a little sailboat. And I did, and went out in big waves, scared my friends half to death, but I thought it was just a lot of fun. I taught sailing at Madison for 4 years when I was there, and just felt drawn to it. And then when I came back from Hawaii after living there for a while, I volunteered to come back on a sailboat, and went from Hawaii to Vancouver. And then I thought my sailing days were over, and then I woke up one morning and looked at the St. Paul Pioneer Press, and there was a picture of a Viking ship down at the Art Museum in Minneapolis, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I wrote to them and told them I was the greatest sailor that ever lived, kind of laid down a little thick, and ended up going from Duluth to Oslo on a replica Viking ship that's in a museum now in...
Now, what was the name?
Hjemkomst.
Hjemkomst. And how long was it?
76.5 feet long, 80-foot mast, square rigger. We had a topsail, and so unlike some of those tapestries that show Viking ships with real short, wide sails, we had a tall sail, and it was much... The efficiency was much improved, and then in a big blow you can drop the topsail, which then blankets the mainsail, and you've reduced your sail area by 20-25%.
Yeah, I know exactly. The rig you're talking about is called a femborg rig, and it's still used sometimes in Norway in some of the ships. I have sailed the smaller Viking ship, a 40-footer, for the Danish National Museum in Denmark once. And it was a lot of fun, and it was a great sailing machine. But I know what you're talking about in terms of that femborg rig. It's not original Viking period, but it is basically a modification on that, right?
It works well. I guess you maybe know more about what the original sails were. Of course, the examples that we used to make our boat was after the Gokstad ship, and that was sitting on the ground for 1,000 years before they dug it up.
Yeah, and I know there's some questions about some of the construction methods and all the other stuff. I know the longest ship that was on the record was a Norwegian ship that was in the Battle of Sval in 999. It was, I believe, close to 150 feet. And yours was 72?
76.
76. And it was built where?
It was built in Halling, Minnesota, in a potato warehouse, and then to get it out of the potato warehouse, they had to take off the front end of the building. So now, if you go to look at the shipyard in Halling, Minnesota, it's an empty lot with a nice commemorative statue.
And what kind of condition was it in when you got to Oslo?
Well, we had a large crack in the hull that required maintenance every 4 days or something, so we had a ship's carpenter, and that was one of his main jobs. Also, the way the rudder is attached to the hull, we used thick rope with whipping around it, and then canvas around the whipping, and then that line that connected the rudder to the hull had to be replaced about once a week. So we had one guy preparing the next line to redo that. There was one time when we had a large wave hit, and Mark talked about how he was holding the rudder and realized the rudder was not attached to the ship other than just holding onto the tiller.
That could kind of ruin your day.
We had to make some repairs.
But with the crack in the hull, that must have been pretty unnerving. Well, how did you keep ahead of that?
we were surprised how bad it was. We did have a 4 kW diesel generator on board, and we had some big pumps and hose that was about this large, and that was shooting out, I think, 50 feet straight into the ocean before it started to fall to the sea. And we were running those pumps for hours, and then we discovered how bad the crack was. We shoved fabric in there, and then sometimes sistered it up, where you take a board that go over the crack and then screw it into the hull on both sides.
Now, there must have been a temptation to turn around.
Well, I was the navigator, and so I calculated distance and course to go to Newfoundland, and I gave that information to the skipper. He said, no, we're going to Norway. And he says, he talked about how most boats are, a lot of the repairs are done at sea.
Yeah.
And so we made repairs and kept going on.
Well, but you also had the tools aboard and the stuff you needed to do to repair it, and you had the generator, you had the pump and all the stuff, so you had prepared for it.
Yes.
But that must have been quite a trip. What kind of sea conditions did you see?
We had rough seas about once a week. The biggest waves are maybe 35 feet. But I do remember one time on the Viking ship when we had wind from behind, and I was sitting in front of by the mast, and the sail was billowing out in front. It was reefed, and we were going fast. And then suddenly we were going down a wave, and we backwinded the sail.
Oh,
even though it was blowing like 20, 25. And the water was shooting out on both sides. It was like we were surfing down a wave. And the guy at the helm, which I think was Mark, was screaming, "Ah!" And suddenly I'm drinking my coffee and the sail is right here.
Yeah. No, but Viking ship types, they really have good ability to sail.
To move,
Really,
yeah.
They can really move fast. I know that the big one that they have at the Danish National Museum, which is 100 feet long, in Roskilde, I think that the theoretical hull speed on that is like 17 knots. And if you were 72, that must still have been pretty fast. It must have been like 12, 13, 14 knots,
Yeah.
something like that.
We had
They can really move.
Yes, we had one watch where we did, I think, an average of 13 or 14 knots for a whole watch, 3 or 4 hours.
That's pretty fast.
Yeah, that's a lot of distance to put on the chart.
How is it to live on board? Was it an open boat?
Yes, we had a tent with a roof, a wooden roof. And in this tent structure that was just after the mast, we had 8 bunks in there. And so many of the crew had to hot bunk it, where the morning watch would be at the wheel, and then the night watch would be in the bunks.
What time of the year was this?
We started out in May from Duluth Superior. We arrived in Norway in July, and so yeah, when we were at sea, it was mostly June and July.
Would you know how many miles that was?
About 5,600 miles, I believe.
That's a long trip.
Yeah.
That is a long trip.
Yeah.
What's your greatest memory from that whole trip? We talked about you cracking a plank. That must have been pretty memorable, but that must have been backwinded. But is there anything else that stands out from it?
Well, crossing the North Sea, I still remember because we were near the Shetland Islands with little wind for a week, and everyone was making plans for what we were going to do when we got to Norway, and who's going to drink the most beer, and who's going to get a hamburger where. But then we had wind, and we're kind of shooting across the North Sea at night, and I was the navigator, and my main worry is to make sure you don't hit something.
Oh, yeah.
And safe passage. And going across the North Sea at night, all these oil rigs and ships running to and fro, back and forth to the oil rigs. That was kind of a wild time. I remember standing up near the bow and just trying to figure it all out, like, because they have an oil rig here, but then there's a platform or some kind of something over here where they.
Yeah.
Oh, gee. So
Oh, they get sort of in the waves out there a little bit.
we made our way through, but I wanted to make sure we were safe.
Yeah. Oh, that must have been interesting. Now, was the idea then to sail the ship back?
I don't know. We talked about it. There were some things that happened in Norway over the winter.
Let me just make sure here. Yeah, it's running. This. Okay. So let me say this thing again. Was there any thought about sailing the ship back?
Yes, but I don't think they were serious. And the boat was taken out of the water and stored on land over the winter with the rocks still in it. We had ballast of about, I think we had 10 tons. No, 2 tons. 2 tons of, I had a college degree, and so they gave me a bathroom scale and a pencil and a piece of paper and told me to figure out how much the rocks weigh. And I believe it was about 2,000 pounds. But then when we lifted the boat out and it stayed in the hard on the land, that wasn't good for the hull. And,
No, they wouldn't.
And so the boat came back to the United States on the deck of a freighter, and that took them to Cleveland. They put it in the water there and towed it over to Detroit, but the pumps had to run continuously, and they took it out of the water and put it on a
Was it still a problem with cracking, or was it just that it was just leaking?
I think the cracks had increased, and if you go to look at the bottom of the ship now, you can see a sad story of a crack about this wide that runs about 30 feet.
I have been told that you cannot build a Viking ship realistically with a saw. That you have to actually hand shape it with an axe or an adze. And do you think that could be part of it? You say that if you do it with a saw, that it actually cuts the fibers and they become far more brittle. Is that what your understanding of that is? Have you ever heard anything about that?
Yes, I have heard. And then, right, the way they originally built these ships was with an adze.
Right.
It's sort of a sideways.
Right.
And yeah, that followed the contours better.
Yeah.
So we weren't up to doing that. We certainly used a lot of power tools, but it may be that results in a better plane.
I've been told that that's the reason why that ship type actually went out of production, because it was so expensive, and it took not only a lot of time, but it was also the materials were very difficult, and it was very expensive to do it. So they came up with more efficient ways, and that's the reason why you don't see that exact boat type carrying forward. You have things that are similar in shape, but not
like
quite the same.
Yeah, like the
Femborg. If you look Femborg, and also if you look at the North Sea cutters, are very much, you can see the ancestry they had in the boat design, but they are built very different, that kind of thing. But you have done other trips too. You have done other Atlantic crossings, and I know you have not only sailed to Norway and Scandinavia, but you've also sailed back over Greenland, right? In a 40-foot sailboat.
Right. I'm very grateful for that trip, because taking the Viking ship to Norway was a tremendous experience, and my relations with the crew, and there was just a lot of publicity with that. But the trip from Norway back that we did with this 40-foot boat in 2014 was actually more interesting, because we followed the path of the Vikings.
Oh, yes.
We went to Shetland Island, spent a little bit of time in Shetland Island, and then we watched the tide, and we went through Yell Sound. I think we were doing 12 knots, even though hull speed was like 7 or 8, but with the current, right through there. And then we went to the Faroes, and that was remarkable. And then from the Faroes, we went to Vestmannaeyjar, just south of Iceland, and that was really cool. And then we went into Keflavik, Iceland, to get repairs done, and then we headed to Greenland. And at that point, we got the word that Prince Christian's Sund was open. It's open like a couple weeks a year, I guess. So we went into this fjord that took us through the southern end of Greenland to a Inuit village. Spent the night there with 4 other ocean crossing sailboats, and then went out the other side and then went to Nanartuluk. but that was so incredible to see these waterfalls coming down the side of the mountains, going past a glacier, and you feel those katabatic winds of 40 to 50 knots. And I was kind of speechless going through there.
It's a great opportunity to follow the path of the Old Norse explorations towards Greenland. And I have unfortunately never been on Greenland. I've never been on Iceland. I've never been to Faroe Islands. Although I'm nearly in the Danish Air Force. I got stationed at the air base up in the Faroe Islands. But instead I wound up being still in Denmark proper. But I've always heard they're very pretty places to go.
Spectacular places. And it seemed for our trip, going around the coast of Norway is gorgeous. But it just got more and more spectacular. And when we went into Vestmannaeyjar, it was really foggy. Like we could see in front of us 200 feet, but aloft there was just total fog. We go in this tight turn to get into Vestmannaeyjar, and we could hear goats and seagulls and puffins above us squawking, and it's just it's just that there's a goat way up there and you can't see it. Remarkable experience.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about a lot of my relatives have been in Greenland and worked in Greenland. A lot of them have been up in the Faroes and other places and kind of thing. But I never gone there myself. It would really be an experience to see that, I'm sure. But the whole inspiration came from your family lineage and sea captains and grandparents and all that kind of interest. So. What about your kids and grandkids? Are they interested in sailing?
Well, I had this passion for sailing, and we did own a few sailboats that we had in Bayfield, and I'm very grateful that my family enjoyed it. So we had some wonderful family trips, going up to Thunder Bay and the Keweenaw and going around the Keweenaw, and I'm grateful that it was a lot of fun for us. And so my son came with us on the trip from Oslo to Bayfield, where we went through Greenland, and my daughter in also. So I'm grateful that it was a good experience. Sometimes, there's so much passion in one family member that the others kind of put up with it.
I know that. I come from a long time sailing family myself. I've had big ships and all kinds of things over the years. But it was my grandfather that did a number on me by taking me when I was yay high, took me down to the marinas and went through and explained all the boats to me and what was a good ship and what was a bad ship, and mainly in the marinas. I mean, the big freighters is a whole different story, but it's something you definitely pass on to future generations, a passion, and it becomes a lifestyle too in many ways. And you and I have been spending a lot of time on recreational boats, and we've both taught sailing and all that stuff, but it becomes really what you're doing more than anything else. Would you say that the trip to Greenland, you said that was a bigger experience than going in the Viking ship?
Yeah, that was. I really, I guess as a navigator, I don't know. It was a more interesting, amazing trip to me. And then that night we tied up at that Inuit village in Greenland. I remember saying to my son that was the most amazing day of my whole life.
Now you can go from Norway to the Shetlands, the old Norwegian territories that are still held in sort of in funny situation, because they were originally, they got into Scottish possession because of a debt that wasn't paid, and it's never been paid. I think that they tried to pay it back a couple of times. But you can get to the Shetlands and the Orkneys, and you can get from there to the Faroes, and you can get to Iceland within the weather window. But in modern weather window in a recreational boat in terms of forecasting. But I don't think you can make it from Iceland to Greenland in the weather window. You have to take a chance on that, right?
Yeah, but still for us, I think to go from Iceland to Greenland, I think it was 6 days. So yes, you can guess pretty good about a 6-day weather window. After 7 days,
I've always been told that the weather forecasts are really very solid for 3 days, but then after that it becomes more or less a computer guess. And I mean there's so many things that can change. Did you have any concerns, especially about that trip from Iceland to Greenland?
No.
That was okay.
Yeah, we had light, reasonable air. I think we sailed some, but we motored a lot. There was one experience when we were headed to Greenland that we were worried about whales because we didn't want any whale to attack the boat. But we were going forward.
Oh, that would be bad.
Yeah.
Shades of Moby Dick, you know.
We were going forward, but towards Greenland in the daylight, and there was a whale coming the other way. It's sort of like on the freeway. You know, your lane was this way, and the whale was, and it was going up. And yelled that out, and the skipper came up to the cockpit immediately. But that was sort of a remarkable experience.
But no problem with the weather?
I wouldn't say no problem. The one problem we had was getting into Prince Christian Sund. You had to dodge these bergy bits. And we arrived a little too early in the morning, so we had to slow down a bit so we had a bit more daylight. Yeah. And I was sitting in the cockpit, my son was at the wheel, and he was shivering, but he had all of his gear on. And I told him what course to go into Prince Christian Sund, but he says, well, can't do that, because there's so he'd have to move around, and so I'd give him the new course after he got around that piece of ice.
Now Prince Christian Sound goes across the southern part of Greenland, and I know that if you can't get through it, you have to go around Cape Farewell, and it's a long way, and it's very dangerous territory down there. I've had so many, in my childhood, I've had so many stories told to me about how bad it is off of Cape Farewell. But if you can go through through Prince Christian Sound, it basically cuts across to the west side of Greenland, sort of like the Magellan Straits in South America. How was it going through that area?
Beautiful. We had one time we went in front of this glacier, and you have this strong wind coming off the glacier, and the skipper was nervous enough that he asked me to go get the anchor, which was stored in the in front of the V berth. So we had to bring the anchor all the way to the cockpit and get it up to the bow, because he was concerned that we were going to have some problem with those really strong winds. But after we got away from the glacier, the wind was not excessive. We didn't sail. And then when we left that Inuit village and headed southwest, that was cloudy, foggy, rainy, but gorgeous. And we got some hamburger at that village. We traded some diesel for some hamburger. So we were eating well, enjoying the scenery.
Now, besides the stuff you've talked about here with crossing Atlantic and various boat types, you've also sailed on Lake Superior. How do you feel about Lake Superior compared to sailing on the ocean?
I enjoy Lake Superior. Sometimes on Lake Superior you can go too long with too little wind and too hot, but I like Lake Superior a lot. I think there's some gorgeous scenery in Lake Superior. It's 300 miles. There's plenty of room to move around. Sometimes we have some serious weather.
I would say we can have some serious weather. You've seen some of that. I've seen some of it.
My last trip on the boat, the last boat I owned was Bergendal, and we had the largest waves I've seen on the lake, which they were about 20 feet. And we were sailing in that. One of my friends became concerned and called the Coast Guard, but I was enjoying it. It was, for Lake Superior, it was pretty heavy, but
it can. I mean, the problem we have on Lake Superior, as you well know, is that we have very short interval between the waves. It pounds you. It's not like the long waves in the ocean. It's just these short and steep waves that just pound you. So if you have a 20-foot wave in Lake Superior, that gets pretty nasty.
Right. And then coming out of the marina at Black River, we were doing this.
Oh yeah.
So that it felt like the boat was exposed to the keel on some of those times we came over those waves.
It can get pretty rough, but in the summertime it's not.
Usually
it's not so bad. You don't want to be on the lake in the wintertime.
No,
that's a whole different story. All the Great Lakes are pretty pretty rough in the wintertime, and there's a lot of shipwrecks from old times away. I mean, the area from Whitefish Point, to Munising in the eastern part, I think there's like 200 plus shipwrecks down there, and that gets pretty serious when you have it. But that area, I said that in another program. As I said, that area reminds me so much of the coast of Jutland. And it's very dangerous in the coast of Jutland too, and I can understand why they could have had problems in old time. But we have to be careful in Lake Superior, just like we have to be in the ocean.
Yeah.
But is there anything else? Anything else you think we could add to this whole thing?
No, thank you for the sailing weekend.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you
more than welcome. Great to have you along again.
You can company, and I enjoyed being here and visiting with you.
Yeah, and I enjoyed having your son and grandson along too. That was a lot of fun this weekend, and we did get a little bit of sailing in, although
we did.
Yesterday we got skunked, but that's a whole different story. Well, thank you very much for being with us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for watching this episode of Sailing SB Freelance. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. It helps us a lot.
It's holding pretty good. Nice.
Can you see the speed?
Oh, it's going to be slow. It's curling again.
You want to let that out a little bit?
Nah, you can let it out a bit. But I'm thinking we want to bring it on.